Thank you, Batya. I'm going to focus on the dual, how should I say, trembling game between presence and absence when we are dealing in our collective memory with women in the resistance. It seems that it's a vast historical chapter that remains somehow in the shadows of men fighters and their stories. Women had been somehow excluded from the title of fighters, even when they fought with their weapons, and sometimes they were killed as fighting during their fight. I must say that as a mother and as a grandmother, I have a very large understanding of resistance. Now, at my age, I know that resistance has so many faces. And I think that a woman who went with her child to the gas chambers, it's also resistance, although she had no Molotov bottle in her hand. A woman who helped the sick and the weak and gave a piece from her little portion of bed, a piece to another person, it's also resistance. But who is counting it? It was somehow taken as a natural thing to women to behave like that. Most of the women in the resistance, partisans as well as ghetto fighters, were in their very young age, at the early 20s. Very often they had no families of their own, which means that they were quite free, I would say, because it was only their lives that was in risk, not the life of children or family. As a matter of fact, not only they were young, the whole members of most of the resistance movement were very young people in their early 20s. And then, like now, women at the same age were much mature than the male, which means that they were more responsible and they could take place in leadership roles, which sometimes the men were not mature enough to do. Jewish women were usually unwanted in non-Jewish partisan groups. And the very, very few who were accepted among non-Jewish partisan groups had often paid a very, very high price for their presence with the fighters. Besides fighting, and they fought like men, and they endangered their lives like men, they were accepted to serve as nurses, cooks, to mend the clothing, to clean, and sometimes to act as lovers, even if they didn't want so. It was the price of being a part of the group. In the camps, women's active resistance was usually limited to sabotaging products as they manufactured them in the factories, or smuggling explosives to the men, like the 4 brave women who smuggled the explosive from Union factory to the Sonderkommando, and they had on the 7th of October 1944 their big rebellion. Unfortunately, all the 4 women were caught, tried, and killed, and of course, they never revealed the names of their partners. The Jewish underground in Eastern European ghettos was a little bit different than in other places in the world. In many of them, women, young women again, with very Aryan appearance and mostly mastering Polish and German very fluently, were called couriers or kashariot in Hebrew. But they were not only couriers, they were actually the lifeline between the enclosed Jewish communities throughout the Nazi-occupied Europe. Distinguished by their looks, They transported letters, information, documents, money, medicine, as well as guns, grenades, ammunition, and other weapons across the borders into the different ghettos. Thus, without them, I believe that no uprising could really take place in those ghettos. In addition, they were also, because of their maturity, in charge of cultural activities in the ghettos, and they also were the ones who laid the basis of ideological meaning to the youth movements. And I believe that many of the activities were very much inspired by their personalities. Those Kashariot were the first one to bring the news about the killing of Jews in the shooting pits in 41, and then after the Vanza meeting in 42, they were the first to acknowledge their peers in the ghettos that the final solution is going to take place. And those Jews who are taken out from the ghetto in the cattle wagons will not come probably back. I think that the activity of those women, and we are going to hear about it not only today, but in the upcoming panels as well, are very important and very symbolic as a female resistance to the Germans. And as a matter of fact, they had a double role here because it was not only the Germans that they had to resist, but also the sexist, old-fashioned views and thoughts and ideas about women and their role in the community. And thus, it did not matter what they did, they always remained under the title Kashariot, couriers. Now, in occupied Western Europe, in France, for example, in Maquis, since 1942, women were very active as well. They were the ones not only to smuggle weapons and to bring information, but they were also the ones who helped to bring Jews out from occupied France and led them to Swiss and Spain. We are talking about the Maquis resistance that was about 40% of them were women, which is a large number. Some of those women were caught, some of them were tried and sentenced to be sent to the camps, like Paula Kaufmann or Odette Neal, that were communist activists, and they were sent, the one to Auschwitz and the other to Buchenwald. In Belgium, since 1940, also women were very active in the resistance. We don't know the exact numbers, but we do know about some of them, and we do know that not only they smuggled documents, but they smuggled about 5,000 children and mothers out from occupied places. Pardon? There was a noise here? Okay. And they not only smuggled them out, but many times they found hiding places for the children, and shortly after they brought the mothers to be near the children in very different kinds of jobs like housekeepers, cooks, nannies, and they smuggled news from the women to their children and vice versa. In Central Europe, in Hungary, for example, also, it was a very small resistance, about 210 people, members, but more than 50% were women. Those women were in charge of many activities, two of them very meaningful. One, the trip, Hatiyul. They brought Hungarian children across the border to Romania and from Romania to Israel. They smuggled them out, and it was even before the occupation of Hungary by Germany in 1941. Later on, after the occupation, they were in charge of building houses for the orphans, and supply food, forge papers, documents to the parents, and save them. In the Dutch underground, we also had women. Again, we don't have the exact numbers, but all in all, the Dutch underground saved 6,500 people out of the 7,000 that lived in Denmark. They smuggled them out in fishers' boats. In that resistance, women had a very, very crucial role, not only with supplies, but also food and hiding places until the people could go on to the ship and travel out of Denmark. Another very important underground activity that women were involved is the underground in North African resistance, Tunisia, Algeria. Women were very active, and women had a very active part in what we called the torch operation that took place at the 8th of November 42. Torch operation was Mifza Lapid in Hebrew, was the operation that enabled the aliens to conquer those places, to enter almost without fighting and without killing. Again, it's women. And women were also in charge of trying and smuggling out Jews from Algeria and Tunisia, especially from the half island of Jerba, trying to save them from the Vichy/Nazi occupation. One of the very well-known figures was Louise Hanon. Unfortunately, she was caught in 1943, and in August 1943, she was sent via Berlin to a concentration camp. Luckily enough, in January 44, she managed to escape, and she joined again a guerrilla movement in the Pyrenees until the end of the war. I will conclude very shortly because my words were only the opening for today's panel and the two of the coming panels in March and the one after. I think that women took such a crucial place in the resistance. They took crucial place in active resistance, in physical, and also in metaphysical, as we are going to see in the upcoming lectures. I think that after 80 years, we should pay some homage to those women and maybe correct the terminology of couriers and find them other terminologies to describe what they have done. I believe that had they been men, streets were named after them, and obviously they were called fighting heroes, lions, and all those descriptions that we like to give to men fighters. But they were women. So somehow they were left. They were left behind a little bit. They were left between the cracks of presence and absence. Thank you.